Welcome to Intoxication. This is a podcast about poetic thinking where we share a different perspective of the social world. Each episode, we take on a topic or a concept and we use the lens of philosophy, psychology, mythology, and literature to analyze the wonderful horrors of the modern world.
For all of you new listeners and viewers, the podcast is named after a colloquium that took place in the 1400s before the arrival of the Spanish in Mexican shores. In this colloquium, titled Intoxication, the wise ones were called forth to discuss whether songs and flowers are a way of understanding what is true about the earth. Today's episode is about the concept of intoxication. And we start with a verse by Shayacamach, one of the Tlamaltini, of these wise ones who attended the Intoxication colloquium, and extrapolate to the meaningfulness of letting go by being intoxicated by poetry and beauty.
And so here is the verse. All of you have come from there, where the flowers are standing, those flowers that derange people. You have come to bring showers of flower garlands, those who inebriate. So, the symbol of the flower in Nahuatl refers to poetry. And so to say that there are flowers that make people crazy and that intoxicate people means that poetry or the poetry of life can be intoxicating. One of the academics that has studied this colloquium, his name is Cruz Alberto Gonzalez, describes poetry as intoxicating because it brings man outside of the self. And in this way, when one can go outside oneself and observe, that is the connection with the divine. So poetry allows the connection with the divine.
This also reminds me, do you think it's related to the fact that, going outside of oneself in order to meet the other that is outside of me, right? And what we were speaking about in the last episode, in the first episode, which is, and how this other can also tell me more about myself if I let myself start dynamic with this other. Is it
one of the primordial experiences, and I think you'll very much agree with me, of the human being is to distinguish between the other and the self. And we can think in psychoanalytic terms, for example, Melanie Klein, to establish what is my boundary, where do I end and where do I begin?
Yeah.
And so because there's a limit to the self and we are constantly encapsulated and in this bubble of me, to be able to go inside oneself, and it's an experience that in itself can be divine, mystical, and intoxicating.
This reminds me of the Song of Amergin that Robert Graves quotes in his book, The White Goddess, which, Robert Graves is a poet, an English poet of the 20th century. He fought at least in the First World War, at least. And he dedicated his work to mythology, some of psychoanalytic interpretation of poetry as well, and was himself a poet. And in this book called The White Goddess, which is The White Goddess, historical grammar of poetic myth, what he says that all poetry, the core of poetry and poetic thinking is to reveal what we've said in the first episode as well, how I am also all of the other things that I am not, but they are living. So if you wouldn't mind, I would like to read a little bit of this because it goes with it. So it goes like this. It's the Song of Amergin, which is a Welsh song, I believe, one of these ancient songs, and it starts like this. I am a stag of 7 times. I am a flood across a plain. I am a wind on a deep lake. I am a tear the sun lets fall. I am a hawk above the cliff. I am a thorn beneath the nail. I am a wonder among flowers. I am a wizard. Who but I sets the cool head aflame with smoke? I am a womb. I am the womb of every holt. I am the blaze of on every hill. I am the queen of every hive. I am the shield for every head. I am the tomb of every hope.
I think what is revealing about poems or verses like this one is that they unconceal an aspect that is common to many cultures in terms of there is a part in spiritual or intellectual or emotional development where we grow by realizing the connection to everything else, and different cultures across the world have done this in different ways. And of course, one of the main criticisms of Western society, modern Western society and capitalist society, is that we cannot see the connection. And that's why this is so relevant now during COVID, because all of a sudden we realize that our freedom, our so-called freedom and our so-called autonomy depends on everything else. And so that comes to as a shock to most of us Westerners, but in reality is a wisdom as old as the trees.
Exactly. Which has to do with also the concept of harmony, how the one world vision view, which we will talk soon in maybe another episode, brings also the concept of harmony. Like if you realize this, how things are connected to one another, you can live in harmony. That just as a concept, let alone what happens when we put that concept into action is a whole other thing, because
or when that concept itself gets put back into capitalist process, and then it becomes a hashtag for yoga classes online. And so then it like that concept, it like the meaning of that concept it gets destroyed through its
becomes, I would say from my theatrical school of thought, it becomes tyrannical, just like it can. So in the Western world, we have this very tyrannical way of the hashtag and the social media, etc. And then if we look all the way to China, well, we have the problem of actual absolute government.
Right.
And well, we won't dwell into this subject today. We will now try to set course back into intoxication and how flowers are involved in intoxication.
So we chose this verse basically because this idea that flowers, that poetry itself can be intoxicating. The concept of intoxication can be a very interesting one because it overlaps with a lot of things. Not only will we go back in history to look a little bit at Greece, at ancient Greece, but also the overlapping concepts of intoxication, from drugs to sexuality to religious experiences. So
yes.
Maybe we'll start again with a bit of historical context.
Yes, we will travel to ancient Greece and Crete, which is even more ancient than Greece. And on the note of flowers that are in both the Shaya Kamach verse and in the Song of Amergin, I would like to read a little bit of the Homeric hymn to Demeter, which is the goddess of the seed, of agriculture and whatnot. And from this verse by Homer, I will then go back to flowers. Well, the verse is filled with flowers. So sings the poet. I begin to sing of Demeter, the holy goddess with the beautiful hair, and her daughter Persephone too, the one with the delicate ankles whom Hades seized. She was given away by Zeus, the loud thunderer, the one who sees far and wide. Demeter did not take part in this. She of the golden double axe, she who glories in the harvest. She, Persephone, was having a good time along with the daughters of Oceanus, who wear their girdles slung low. She was picking flowers, roses, crocus, and beautiful violets. Up and down the soft meadow, iris blossoms too she picked, and hyacinth and the narcissus, which was grown as a lure for the flower-faced girl. By Gaia, all according to the plan of Zeus, she, the earth Gaia, was doing a favor for the one who receives many guests. It, the narcissus, was a wondrous thing in its splendor. To look at it gives a sense of holy awe to the immortal gods as well as mortal humans. It was 100 heads growing from the root. Its sweet fragrance spread over the white skies above. And I will leave it there, since now we have all the elements that I needed, which is the two goddesses, which is the mother and the daughter. So she's kidnapped. She's taken by surprise with this narcissus, which is a pathological narcissus. I say pathological because it goes beyond the boundaries of a regular narcissus. And she is, as Homer says, this flower, narcissus, gives holy awe to both immortal and mortals. And well, I would like to point out that probably the reason why this flower gives holy awe to immortals and mortals alike, it's because it's the root word for narcotics. Narcissus in Greek is narkikos. So what Persephone sees is that the earth opens up, and this huge 100-head narcissus blossoms in her presence, and she is in rapture with this holy awe. And this is the reason why she gets to be kidnapped by Hades. She is in rapture by this. So this is one of the first points that I find very interesting in the topic of intoxication, because in various religions, including Christianity, we read how in presence of divinity we are in rapture. And in origin, what we should link it to is an experience of being intoxicated by something. There are worlds that are influenced by passion. There are very passionate worlds. And pathology comes from the word passion, from pathos, the Greek word pathos, which means this, like, I am no longer, my boundaries, the limits can't hold me or limit me too much. I feel like
the loss of a boundary. It's the loss of a boundary,
yes.
Which is exactly the same. The comment that is made about the Shaya Kamach verse, which is the ability to go outside oneself is in itself intoxicating because it's the loss of the boundary.
Exactly. And well, these traditions of intoxication and this, okay, retomo. This intoxication is very much linked to the mystical experience, which is the first sort of religious tradition. The note of intoxication is very present in all of mystic traditions, coming from shamanism and also in the cults surrounding agriculture, like the cult of Demeter, which are famously known. Are the Eleusinian mysteries, which were religious mysteries that their lifespan was about 2,000 years. And I find that very important, the fact that they were 2,000 years in lifespan, because that gives us a little perspective about our 2,000 years in Christianity, and how if you are immersed in Christianity, you think 2,000 years is the way that this has been forever. And there are other religious traditions that also have had this same lifespan of 2,000 and some years. Anyway, well, in both of these different experiences, either the shamanistic path or the path of the initiate in this bigger lodge that is more traditional to the agricultural groups in some 1,000 years ago. What is different from our regular religious dogma is that the initiate is the one that sees. Actually, in the Eleusinian mysteries, the initiate is called the mystes, and then the epoptes, and those two words are linked to he that sees something. And what does he sees? He sees, well, the revelation of what is the truth of why we are here, of the how and why of our not only human existence, but all of what is living. And well, you can arrive to this epopteia, to this vision, by two manners: either by fasting, which is very strong tradition as well, by fasting, which is I will not let anything inside, and whatever it is that I have already inside will come outside and connect. Mm-hmm. And bring out the intoxication. So it's you get intoxicated by what's already inside. And the second way is to actually let the other inside, and that will set out a dynamic that will also put you in the situation of the revelation of whatever it is this has to reveal. Sorry.
So basically, no, I'm just thinking about this, like either through fasting or through allowing the other or the strange inside. So either by stopping what normally goes inside, right, or by allowing more inside within the boundary. By breaking either of these dynamics, is that then you establish connection with the divine or with the poetic or with a revelation, right? So you have to, I suppose, kind of stop what is normal, what you ingest normally, in order to then connect to the otherness within you. You cannot connect to the otherness within you with the regular, by satisfying your regular needs, or
with your daily needs. I would say it's not a daily thing. Actually, in the Eleusinian mysteries, one had to fast before letting the Kykion, before drinking the Kykion, which is the sacred drink, which is of course consecrated to Dionysus. And every drink that is consecrated to Dionysus, we must see it as intoxicating, inebriating. He's the god of intoxication and inebriation, not of wine. This is one of the things that we know him now as the god of wine and beer and drunk and being drunk. But it's a bit more complex, because in this myth of these two goddesses, Demeter, Persephone, this is all about a mother teaching a daughter as well how to become a mother. So the key point in the myth is also the birth of Dionysus uh, being mothered by Persephone. There are various versions of the births of all gods and divine creatures, but in the theme of intoxication, or on this note, the one that is more proper to use or to side with is the one where Persephone is the mother of Dionysus. So Dionysus is completely linked also to the netherworld. So this means that he is also a god, not only of the feast, but how the party is linked in the mysteries of life and death. Well, and also I would like to link these mysteries, the Eleusinian mysteries, to the Cretan world, which is previous to the Greeks. We actually know of the Cretans by the Greeks and by the experience and the relations the Greeks had with the Cretan world. And in that on that line that we're talking about, Dionysus is also the protagonist of the most important myths of the Cretan world, which is the labyrinth. Dionysus is represented by the Minotaur as a previous symbol before becoming this, what we know as this god of inebriation and intoxication and whatnot. What I would like to point of the Cretan world and how this echoes in the Eleusinian mysteries is that, I will quote Karl Kerenji, which is an expert in Greek religion and Greek myths, which is the same, religion and mythology. And he says the following in his book, Dionysus, Archetypical Image of Indestructible Life. He says that in Crete, the human aspiration to timelessness was dismissed by surrendering to the grace of life in the most complete way the world has ever known. What I find interesting is that the Cretan rites and feasts and their whole religious worldview is obsessed with life, with life. There is no scatology in their stream of thought. They highlight life as a whole feast. In that sense, death is also part of life. It's not something separate that will take you to another world, which what scatology says. And well, for all of you that are unfamiliar with the term scatology, scatology is the concept of being preoccupied of the end of times, or the end of things. So the Egyptians have a very scatological mindset in their whole Book of the Dead, the preparation of the dead, so they can continue in a whole other world different of this. And this is also a tradition that is shared by Christianity.
Oh yeah.
And
we do not, the Christian world does not celebrate the realm of the living.
And of here and now,
there is, like, thou shalt not live and enjoy, thou shalt suffer.
Exactly.
And rest yourself and control yourself, and no enjoyment.
Your life will happen when you die.
Right.
If you are chosen to
what
go.
What is more a negation of life than that? Your life will happen when you die.
That's what Nietzsche constantly points out, and why he hates Christian thought, because he says that this annihilates life. And that's why he wants to go back to the Dionysiac experience, because the Dionysiac vision, what reveals is this is what matters is here and now. Whatever it is here and now that you are doing. That's actually what is allegedly revealed in the Eleusinian mysteries. The initiate would prepare himself, and I won't go into the details of what this preparation entailed, but I will post the bibliography. So the initiate would have to go through a huge preparation before entering the omphalos. The omphalos is the center of the temple, which means uh,
The belly.
the belly button, which
The
means
navel.
belly.
The navel.
Navel, yeah. So that's how important these mysteries were to these people. They thought that center of the temple was the navel of the world. And that's actually one of the phrases we constantly use in Spanish. Like, you think you're the navel of the world. You think the world revolves around you because you are the belly button of the world.
Stare at your navel.
Sarah, yeah.
Staring at your navel, yeah.
So well, in the in the navel of the temple, which they thought was the navel of the whole world, they would then drink this potion that was basically poisonous, because it had a lot of stuff which include in the beverage. It included flowers and plants, as well as the claviceps purpurea, consecrated to this goddess. And it's actually where Hoffman synthesized LSD from claviceps purpurea. Yeah, you can read this on Road to Eleusis, written by Hoffman, Wasson, and I forgot the third one, which is a big study of this, of how religious experience is marked by or influenced by intoxication. So this beverage, which was basically poisonous, would take the body of the initiate into a torturous experience, hurt, cramps, vomit, which is also what happens with peyote and ayahuasca.
It's part of a cleansing process. Again, is like to kind of play with the boundaries of what's inside and outside the body in order to welcome otherness.
That's why they say in the modern in the modern experience of going to take peyote or something, that you should fast a little bit, or you should this or that, because otherwise this representation, this rehearsal of death will be worse. Mm-hmm. Because that's what we should think this experience was, to go near a death experience in order to be reborn.
Death of the near death experience, but I think more related to the death of the self for a small period of time, right? So it's to experience the disconnect of the ego in order to experience something else.
Yeah, and this what you're saying is very important, because it will highlight in a little bit why Dionysus is the god that brings kindness to humanity. He's also labeled like this because, well, and usually they say, well, it's because of the wine and whatnot. Wine makes you happy and wine makes you sociable. It has more to do with the death of the self, the surrendering of the ego, and the allowance of oneself to start a different dynamic with the other in a social
setting.
World.
We'll go back to William James shortly, but just on what you're saying, William James, who is a psychologist and philosopher from the 19th century, he talks about intoxication through alcohol. And what basically he says is that drunkenness. So intoxication, I mean, it can happen again, ayahuasca, peyote, mushrooms, choose your poison. But he just talks specifically about alcohol because maybe he hadn't tried anything else. Being the good religious man that he was, he only could drink the blood of Christ. So drunkenness, he says, expands, unifies, and says yes. So he describes the experience of drunkenness as as affirming, as life affirming in a way, as exciting, what he calls the yes function in man. And this yes function doesn't just mean yes to socializing, yes to flirting with someone, yes to dancing, but it means yes to letting go of my reservations, of my inhibitions, which now, of course, in modern society, we can't just be like, hey, let go of all your inhibitions, because that's why it is society, because there's an order to it. But there's an aspect of drunkenness and of intoxication that appeals to people, because then
Yeah.
you forget the limits.
Yeah. And well, we will go back to this again, how this same how can lead to very different this same well cause can bring very different effects. It can give you a good trip or it can give you a bad trip. This same realization, this same method or whatever, the same experience can set you up in two different worlds. In this sense, I would actually add that William James and the whole Western European tradition only drinks because Christianity was victorious over all the pagan traditions before.
Right.
So it's famously known that the early Roman Christians banned, like the Roman Empire banned all night gatherings, and the Eleusis mysteries were famously for being in the night. It took place on the 27th of September, sort of, and they were famous for making the day dawn in midnight, for bringing light into midnight. And we must think that this light that they're talking about, of course, it should be represented by a huge bonfire where we're all going to dance and probably engage in orgiastic experiences and whatnot. But it also means the light inside all of us, that we now understand the why and how of myself. Because anecdotally, what the metaphor of these mysteries wanted to mark was the travel, the trip that the seed of the earth, the seed makes when it's well planted. So for them, the seed was planted, but it didn't stay there. It would go down to the netherworld, to the underworld, and have an interview with the goddess Persephone. And after seeing Persephone and being in this relationship with her, they would know why we are here and doing what we're doing. So now the seed could come up and blossom. Before that, if you didn't understand, you would just rot. And that's also very important because well, the fungus, the world of fungi is this very very liminal thing where it's rotting but it's alive, you know. So it's very linked to this, to the fact that we all rot when we die, and that rotness will give life. So calm down. You will live forever in the flowers of the garden of your family. And you will live happily in this life if you responsibly know what seed you are and what are you blossoming to. So, and just to finish with this mythical part of the podcast, Dionysus is also famously known for being the twice born. Mm-hmm. So he's born once, and then he's always born twice, because he's born once and then they kill him, either the Titans or Hera's wrath by Zeus. But the one that will be interesting for us is the one with the Titans, and then I will close the mythical world, which is in the story, in the myth, where he's eaten by the Titans, he's dismembered, which is another very important image in the ancient world, the dismemberment of the chosen one, or the passion of the chosen one, which is like the passion of Christ. He's dismembered and then eaten by the Titans, which are some sort of relatives of his. And Zeus is enraged by this action. So he fulminates with his powerful race, the Titans, and humanity is born from the ashes of the Titans and Dionysus. Zeus recovers the heart of Dionysus, puts it in his thigh, which is the biggest muscle, which is filled with vitality. He puts it in his thigh, and then he will be born again by it. But what's important is that humanity has both things. We are both Titans and Dionysiacs. We're both Titanic and Dionysiac. And according to this myth, what humanity has to realize and has to overcome, it's our tyrannical impulses of eating the other when the other
we are
is
not overcoming that at the moment.
Not at all. Yeah,
We're going the other way. Dionysus, I pronounce it that correctly?
Dionysus, yeah.
Dionysus, yeah, is not at the forefront of the electoral campaign in the US.
No, he's left the building. Dionysus has left the building a while ago. I would actually say
Dionysus,
our
come
party's
back.
stuck.
Come
Yeah,
back,
Dionysus, come back.
So, even though the drunken Catholics are not very into Dionysus, that doesn't mean they do not understand intoxication. And so that's where enter William James. As I said a bit earlier, he was a philosopher and psychologist. He wrote what the book called The Varieties of... Well, he didn't write, sorry. It's a compilation of his lectures from 1901 and 1902. He used to teach at the University of Edinburgh. And the book is called The Varieties of Religious Experience. And so The Varieties of Religious Experience is a broad account of religious experience. And religious experience, as you can imagine, overlaps with mystical experiences, with the mysticism that Andrea is talking about. And he actually subcategorizes mystical experience as part of religious experience. In the way that he describes mystical experience, he talks a little bit about this, the experience itself taking possession of mind and body. So instead of just being kind of like a prayer, going to mass experience, this is quite different from that. And so he interviews and goes back to look into the accounts of saints in particular, or extremely religious people, and to look into how they described these visitations, right, or these visions. And so one of the things that in the way that he describes these mystical experiences is that there is an obliteration of space and time, of normal or regular sensation, and of experiences that we qualify as ourselves. So just like we were talking about in terms of intoxication through the loss of a boundary or through the play with the boundary of the self, the accounts of mystical religious experience in William James of like nuns and saintly priests is also the interruption of what we understand as the self. And also he starts talking about these experiences as a feeling of dissolution. There is a crossover, or actually inspired by William James. We'll see a little bit later on in the 20th century with Abraham Maslow, the description of peak experiences, which again he takes these concepts again of obliteration of time and space to describe peak experiences, but in a secular way. But I'm not going there just yet.
Yeah.
One of the other things that William James talks about is this overlap with pathology, mystical overlaps with deep pathology, because is the loss of the boundary. So if you think of schizophrenia, or other severe psychological disorders where there is a deconstruction of where the self ends and begins, it's funny, kind of, in a funny, not funny way, that being in touch with God is the same, or is very similar to being crazy.
I would like to give an example of this good trip, bad trip, and the relationship between insanity or being touched by God. That for the Greeks, for instance, it's the same thing. It just depends what God you're being touched by. It's what they called mania, which is mania, and mania means I am in God, or God is in me, which is the state of being that the women consecrated to Dionysus were famously in, to be able to dismember a bull, for instance. It's this kind of intoxication also breaks boundaries even in what you thought you could do, because the Bacons were famously known for dismembering bulls, but without technology outside their hands, and this maniac state that we're in. And another example is Heracles. In the tragedy of Heracles, Euripides puts Heracles in a very resentful mode. He's very he's resented at his mortal father, and wishes he was only the son of Zeus and whatnot. He's touched by the goddess of madness out of vengeance for another goddess who is constantly on his back, which is Hera, from whence the name Heracles comes from. And what is very interesting is that in the translation, or in the original text, what Euripides says is in the mouth of the mortal father of Heracles, which is Amphitryon, or host in English. He says, "What kind of bad trip are you in? You must now go to hell and back to be well," which is another very interesting thing. In order to be cured of madness in this Greek world, one should go to and set out to make a katabasis, which is a trip to the underworld, which is completely linked with this intoxication, seeing Persephone, and knowing who or what you are, and what your boundaries are. I just wanted to point that out, that it is not until Christianity has overcome most of the religious imaginary that we lose the fact that the other is always divine. Yeah. That this otherness is always divine.
It's part of the revelation that it makes the wise wise.
Yeah, it's right. Even if it's demonic, even if it's the devil is also, or would be also, divine. That's why
in Christianity, the devil must be exorcised. Must be
cast out, must be cast away, and not has to be cast away. It's not, it mustn't be integrated in any form. It is not part of me in any form. And in other religious viewpoints,
that's the bipolarity kind of the Christian mindset, right? Is that we must push all that is thought as evil out of ourselves. And so in the attempt, which is failed from the get-go, we become
schizophrenic. This is it's it's part of what both Freud and Jung say, that is, well, in different ways. Freud says we are more the caveman than we would want to acknowledge,
Mhm.
and Jung says we are more a pagan than a Christian, and we are actually haunted by this pagan imagery that we feel it's wrong and should be cast out, but it's just the memory of before,
Which even
which is,
permeates secular society, right? Which permeates like this kind of,
there is no
is the mind.
secular society. I would
Yeah,
say
yeah.
there is no
There is
secular society.
constant polarization with different names. So just to go back to the bad trip and the good trip,
Yeah.
to the academic research on that. In 1917, another philosopher, theologian, Rudolf Otto from Germany, wrote the book The Idea of the Holy, where he wanted to also research the experience of the divine. And so he says, well, the divine, just quite controversial for its time, the divine is not only related to God, and when it's not related to God and to religion, it's called the numinous. And the numinous is that realm outside of religion, and the numinous has two sides. The numinous can be mysterium tremendum
Mhm.
or mysterium fascinans from the Latin. And mysterium tremendum is horrifying, is this awful, um, holy other, loss of self, intoxicated frenzy, but also ecstasy, sense of dissolving like you would experience in schizophrenic episodes. And Mysterium Fascinans is the other side of the same coin, but it's the awesome,
Fascinating. Yeah.
awe-inspiring, fascinating. Also, feeling holy other, this creature feeling that you are small in comparison to the vastness of the universe. So, an experience like this, he's the first one to start kind of hinting at the religious, at the non-religious aspect of this, which is, if you're looking at the stars, you might feel that this planet is insignificant and that somehow that experience is awe-provoking.
Yeah.
Whereas the same experience might make someone feel horrified in cases, for example, of agoraphobia. So this Rudolf Otto, William James is taken as a basis for Abraham Maslow, who, if you ever heard of the hierarchy of needs, well, self-actualization is at the top. And that's what we should all aim at as good Westerners who satisfy our basic needs with basic income and welfare state. But that's not, that's not something that other nations have access to. But anyway, whatever, that's not the point. So Maslow in the 60s says, okay, so I'm not going to call them religious or mystical experiences because that's, hinting at God. And why would we do that in the 60s? So he calls them peak experiences. And basically, again, is they can happen through a variety of contexts from, I don't know, going for a walk
Climbing a mountain.
climbing a mountain, to music, to flow experiences of like playing an instrument or witnessing a work of art that you so admire or what have you. And at around the same time, and I'm just gonna cite the work of a woman. Her name was Margarita Lasky. Around the 60s, 70s, she did some research on ecstasy, also trying to separate ecstasy from the religious. So whereas Maslow was doing peak experiences, Rudolf Otto and William James had already spoken about ecstasy as something that, for example, Saint Theresa had described
Mhm.
in her experiences or her visions or visitations by God. So Margarita Lasky says, no, ecstasy has a lot of has overlapping areas with other realms of human experience that are not just religious.
Yeah.
And so now we land on intoxication and loss of borders or boundaries through sexuality. So
Do we?
we do, because we so we land through Saint Theresa, who describes like all her phraseology, her description of her visitations by God are um, sexual and
Ecstatic.
ecstatic, and the way she describes them are like, she could be describing a sexual experience or an experience of intoxication through other substances, and you wouldn't know unless you knew it was.
Yeah, that's which is what you just said. You wouldn't know unless you knew, or unless you know, which means you wouldn't know unless you're an initiate. You wouldn't know unless you've been through this before. And that's also what's very interesting, because it's part of an ineffable process. Whatever it is revealed through these experiences, call them what you will, is something that is ineffable.
Right.
One cannot really speak or articulate it with with rational thought. It's one of those things where you just, when like you've experienced a very radical experience, a near death experience with someone in an accident or whatnot, and then you talk about this again, and you just look at the person you share this experience with, and in this look you might be closer to understanding that trying to articulate with a word, because it's so far off the limits of ourselves. It's actually a thought process that reminds us that you are the tree, you are your enemy, you are not what you are. This, it's
Yes.
very moving, I think.
Yeah, the ineffability of it is also the way that is, and that's also why it's so hard to study scientifically, and why psychologists who have attempted to research these peak mystical experiences, other than having qualitative research about it, this kind of research has been relegated to what it's the field that is called in psychology transpersonal psychology. So just jumping back into sex and intoxication, and we have, of course, Mr. Georges Bataille. He was a French philosopher who wrote Eroticism and Sensuality. And eroticism and sensuality is, he takes a lot from psychoanalysis to talk about the experience of the erotic. But there is a section in the book where he talks about the mystic, the mystical, and the sexual. And again, he traces it back to the mystical and the sexual belong to the same domain because it has to do with a terrifying darkness. If you want to think about it in terms of the bad trip, that's one way. But also terrifying darkness comes in the terms of the erotic, is the loss of boundary, right? The loss of boundary physically, we can only understand it, most of us, only through sexual experience.
Actually, yeah. So, no, go on.
I mean, unless you're stabbed.
Well, yeah.
Or unless you give birth to a child, which involves a
Yeah,
sexual experience.
exactly.
Right? It's
Yeah.
that the break of the membrane that holds me together. So he looks into an account of this priest. His name is Father Bernard, a French priest. I can't really pronounce French very well. And this priest says that sex expresses the union between humanity and the ineffable Godhead. But the reason why it does that is because sex possesses in human experience what the sacred event cannot have. So I think what he's getting at is that sex allows for the physical experience of the breaking of a membrane that allows the other in, that cannot be fully fulfilled in religious experience. And to say that, it's quite wild.
This is very wild, but it's also ancient thesis, because in the early rehearsals or the early attempts of organized religion or of organizing ourselves as a society, the reason behind the orgiastic rites was to do as the earth does. So if we all merge in this, if we all embody fertility, for instance, if we all embody fertility, which means, okay, we planted the seeds in the morning, and then at 4 o'clock, we're gonna meet and we're gonna do a huge orgy because we must embody fertility. That is something bigger than us. Not only to have kids ourselves, but if we engage in this act, we will
imitating
finish
nature.
a cycle. Huh?
Right. Yeah, and I was just gonna say that as well, because and it's exactly what you said, this connection with the earthly reality, right? And that this priest, Father Bernard, talks about. He's like, this transcendental union is connected to the horror, which is kind of what you were talking about, Eleusis, the Eleusinian mysteries of the seed going down into the netherworld. It's kind of the same. That is like the sexual experience has the ability to connect us to darkness, to this earthly aspect of ourselves that religion sometimes tries to pull away from, right? There's an aspect to sex that is very carnal and very connected to nature in a way that we don't want to be, in a way that in the progressive, quote unquote, industrialized, quote unquote, modern world that we've created, sex brings you back to earth in a way that is not within the control, within your control, within anybody's control, right? And that is the horror of sex, in a way. But it's also the divinity of it.
This is very interesting, because this becomes horrific. I think that this becomes more horrific when society becomes even more obsessed with our own identity. Before, this is what and this is part of what dwells in the Cretan world, which is that is sort of the last splendor, quote unquote, of humanity, where the anthropos wasn't in the center, but was part of this whole, beside the dealing of human sacrifice and whatnot, but it was it had a more whole relationship with the other and oneself. And our obsession with identity, well, you don't want to have sex under these circumstances because my identity that I have built with all my willpower does not allow me to want to have sex with you, for instance. I shouldn't.
Or in this particular way, or to do this in this
way.
particular manner, because then that doesn't comply to the persona that I created, that I think I am.
Yeah. And in the difference between these orgiastic rites, for instance, is that the functionality, we must do this in order for this to function. It is part of our function. It is part of the great chain of being and our actions that we must do in order to this keep moving. We must do as nature does. We must engage ourselves in the other this way. And just to I also think that's why orgies are not so popular these days, because
they are, you just don't know.
Well, I've been invited to.
Very good.
I've declined.
I don't know. Let me keep track of these. I'm sure, and by I'm sure it's I know that people have organized orgies during the pandemic because it's a response to the limitation of freedom, but I don't think it's a response. I don't think it's an invitation to the earthly horrors. I think it's just a
that's my point.
reactivity to you're telling me not to do this, therefore I'm going to do it. It's a very
Yeah,
different
that's my point.
orgy.
It's no, it's the sense, it's completely different. The meaning behind it's completely different. This is a reactive thing of, oh, you're telling me I shouldn't be in orgies, then I'm gonna be in orgies. The very different mindset of the ancient world is, this is the meaning behind it all. I must do this. It's filled with meaning. Now it's not so filled with meaning. And I'm not saying this as a good or bad thing. It's just what I think it happens. Like, the meaning behind it's just actually more of a, so you've been in orgies?
Right.
How are they? Yeah, it's more like a show thing.
It's more the
part of,
profile that you have of yourself now,
exactly,
and whatever
not
it is
a
you think you are.
not a cosmic viewpoint of we must all engage in this. And just to finish with this orgies parenthesis, fun fact is that the children that were fun fact, the children that were conceived in these orgiastic rites were famously known as being the sons or daughters of the gods. So there's where we have a good source of why in mythology we have a lot of mortals that are son of Zeus, son of Mars, son of Demeter, because in these rites all of us were touched by God and we're in a maniacal state, engaging in this rapture that means the falling of our boundaries.
And just as we are not inviting you to go to an orgy, we're also not inviting you to do drugs. But drugs are also an interesting overlap, or an obvious overlap with intoxication. And we've already mentioned alcohol, we've mentioned peyote, ayahuasca, this kind of, in Brazil, Peru, there's plenty of videos out there from Vice that you can watch about peyote and ayahuasca and the journeys you can make to find yourself in the Amazon and all that comes with that, all that tourist industry of intoxication. But just
show business.
Show business, yes. But just as there is that, and everybody knows about it now, there is also, which you would also know about, is Maria Sabina. Maria Sabina was a Mazateca woman from Huautla, Puebla, that's Mexico. And she became famously known in the 60s because some Americans found her.
Well, and I mean, just people from the 60s found her. I would say people from the 60s, because the Beatles are not American.
Right. Well, no, I think I don't even remember the researcher that initially met her. I'm not going to say found her because that's pretty, it's a kind of
pretty
like, passive.
That's a colonizing thought.
Yes, a colonizing thought. So anyway, so once she met with these people and she showed them the journey that you take through magic mushrooms, they became popularized, and I think a bunch of people went to visit her. From, I think, was it Oliver Stone? No, that was with Marcos. Sorry.
Yeah, that was Marcos, I think.
Cut that part. Sorry.
Yeah.
Freudian slip. No, that's not a Freudian slip. Anyway, so she, after these people, 3, 2, 1. After she became popularized, or she became popular amongst the 60s hippie circles, there was a book published by the chants that she said, or that she
chanted.
That she chanted, that she sang while she was preparing the rites to take mushrooms. And so I think that these chants quite well exemplify, again, this unity with everything. So I'm just going to read a little bit of one of them. I'm going to skip the part in the middle just because I think that is just the first and the last part that convey best this unity. Okay, so this is one of her chants. Because you gave me your clock, because you gave me your thought, because I'm a clean woman, because I am cross star woman, because I am a woman who flies. I am the sacred eagle woman says. I am the Lord eagle woman says. I am the lady who swims says. I am the woman book that is beneath the water says. I am the woman of the populous town says. I am the shepherdess who is beneath the water says. I am the woman who shepherds the immense says. I am the shepherdess and I come with my shepherd says. Because everything has its origin and I come going from place to place from the origin. So this kind of like lack of clarity of where you come or what you are, you're the shepherdess, here's the shepherd, the origin, this whole thing kind of, I think, very well represents the unity of it all and the ambiguity of what is what. And that
no, I'm sorry. What you just said, ambiguity. I would say that is a key thing. That I don't know when or where did it sort of start. Well, Nietzsche would say that it has a lot to do with Christianity, but humanity is very hard for us at the present time and for a couple of 100 years past as well to engage in ambiguous images, concepts, situations. We do not enjoy ambivalence. But well, what she says is there are two kinds of people. One that goes about its way as a schizophrenic paranoid person. That means that if you are not with me, you are against me. And
hello 2020.
Contrary and all mass mobilizations.
Sure.
Contrary to which we've had a lot in 2020, even though we've had, well, yes, 2020. And the depressed position, which is neither of them is good or bad, it's just what it is. And the depressed position means a tendency of depression in the self because one knows that both the good breast and the bad breast belong to the same person.
The good breast and the bad breast for our listeners and viewers is two main concept of Melanie Klein's object relations theory, which she poses this period before what the stages that Freud identified as genital, anal, oral. She goes even further back. And she talks about the relationship of the baby, of the infant with the breast, with the breast of the mother. And there's a good breast and there's a bad breast, and they are all the same.
And yeah, that revelation, which is awe-inspiring, will set you in a sort of depressed mode always, because you always know that even though you love someone, that doesn't mean that sometimes you don't like them, or that someone that you love can hurt you in general. And that's being able to consider ambivalence, consider the ambiguity in the other and in me. And that is a very complex, mature stream of thought according to psychoanalytic terms. And I would believe, and I would say that we are failing on that one, and we are becoming more and more schizophrenic paranoid. I would like to just finishing something that I started before, which is when the Roman Empire bans all celebrations in the night, which are mainly pointed at the Eleusinian mysteries. Also, that's the beginning of a mycophobic phase in Europe. So Europe was, as Christianity bathes Europe, the people in Europe stop engaging in the harvest of mushrooms, or start being very afraid of mushrooms because they derange you. And this deranged experiences must be linked with this Manichaeism that is that Christianity embodies, which is there's black, there's white, there's good, there's evil. And so any funky experience would be part of the demonic, and you wouldn't want to be part of it. And then when the Spanish come to Mexico, that phobia helped that this tradition, the tradition in Mexico of the mushrooms and the sacred plants was able to keep on going and to not die, because the tradition was already marked by secret. So if you were going to take mushrooms or engage in these rites, you're not supposed to talk about it that much, and the shaman, which is like Maria Sabina, would be in charge of it, and it's just your experience. You don't go around saying, oh, I just ate some mushrooms to ask about my family and that's what they said. No, you don't. You speak actually in a very low voice to them, because they're sin, and sin in Nahuatl means the small. So the mushroom, the magic mushroom, it's called the small one that blossoms. This is interesting because in Greece, all of the hills that are consecrated to Dionysus are famously consecrated by Dionysus after they've received lightning. And magic mushrooms come from earth that received lightning. So yeah, so that's a huge linkage of this, what we've talked about in the previous episode as well, of this not only parallel between cultures, but what Joseph Campbell, which is an archetypical psychologist, psychoanalyst of the 20th century. He's famous for the Hero of 1,000 Faces, most famously for, but that's his thesis. His thesis is there is this archetypical memory that binds us all together. And in these two images of the sin of the magic mushroom, that I think it's very eloquent. It's a very eloquent image. Okay, I will now invite Socrates in. He's famous for inviting his disciples not to go to theater, because theater is for the folly. But what I find very interesting is that, well, to begin with, theater, the origin of theater, we must also link it to the Eleusinian mysteries in a way, because what the vision of theater, which is the theamata, wants to bring to the table, it's sort of not secular, because the theater feast was inside this religious feast for Dionysus, but theater was sort of a way to translate the vision that the initiates would have in Eleusis for all of the Greeks, not only the few initiates that could make it to the Omphalos every year, but to make this truth to be known by all through theater. And that is also why Dionysus is so linked to the rite of theater. Socrates was famously known for, as I said, inviting his disciples to stay out of the theater and also out of nature, that he was an animal of the polis, a political animal, and that here in the polis, in the city, was everything that he needed to learn something. Not nature has nothing to offer me, that otherness has nothing to offer me. And so in that sense, well, he definitely doesn't back up the whole tradition of the Eleusinian mysteries. But what I find funny, and also Nietzsche finds very interesting in The Birth of Tragedy, is that the only way that he's able to transcend is through Plato's dialogues. And a dialogue is a dramatic setting of two. There is one thesis that is spoken by the teacher or the disciple, and then the teacher or the disciple wants to make the other see things our way. Basically, the teacher wanting to guide the disciple into a good thought. And I say good in the Greek terms because they do believe that there is such thing as good or bad. So a good, edifying, rational thought. So what I find interesting is that this what still prevails, or what is able to transcend in terms of intoxication, even without the being actual intoxicated and in other state of consciousness, is that what the teacher needs or wants, its goal in the Socratic dialogue, is to go inside the disciple, so the disciple must allow the other to come in, and this new thought move around yourself, and this idea, to use more Platonic terms, this idea to come inside and move me and make me different. Because that's part of the lesson that archetypically the seed would learn. I go down to hell, now I know what I am, what I must do, and I come out, and I come outside different, transformed.
And that philosophy is meant to do, to take
exactly.
over the preconception or the understanding of something about reality and transform it into, I don't know, potentially something better, not necessarily, but yes.
What I find interesting is this dynamic that one must allow the other inside. And in that sense, well, conversing and dialogue with the other it's not something that you can just do lightly, I don't think, because most of the time we are married with our identity and with what we think we are and what we want to be, and to actually change our minds or be able to change our minds and in that way change ourselves, we must part from allowing ourselves to do so,
to be intoxicated.
Yeah.
Will we
should end it at this point. And I should add that part of the idea of this podcast as well is to be intoxicated by thought and poetry and flower and the other in general.
And we welcome your criticism. We also, if you have positive feedback, we also welcome your positive feedback, but we're also quite interested in establishing a dialogue with those of you who disagree with us, because that's more interesting in some ways.
Passion. It's a passion setter when someone doesn't agree with you.
Right. So in the spirit of passion and intoxication, thank you for joining us today. You can find us on Instagram, you can find us on YouTube, you can find us on Spotify. We are in Xochitl. My name is Andrea Martinez.
My name is Andrea Padilla.
And we'll see you in episode 3.
That's right.